Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm on a mission. Actually, two missions. First mission that I have today is to accomplish what the students asked me to do, is give you a last lecture. And I like talking, but I know that talking often is not enough. And so my second mission is to actually give you something to take with you when you leave. And so what I'm going to talk about today is grit, which I consider to be life's essential element. Now, if we go through, the dictionary, and you look up the term, you can find all these, wonderful definitions of grit. And I think they're all good, but there's something else that really resonated with me when I think of grit. I think of persistence, resilience, growth. Not in any linear order, because they're all interconnected, and they feed back into one another. So the more you grow, the more persistent you can be. The more persistent you are, the more resilient you can be, so forth, and so on. Now, you can find grit inside yourself. All of us can. All of us have it. But for some reason, many of us are blocked by the various things that we confront in life, or the myths and the stories we make up about ourselves, and we can't tap into it. You can also find it outside of yourself. And in that regard, part of this presentation is about my life, but also part of it is about the things that I've seen, the books I've read, the people whose speeches I have listened to. And so I borrow heavily from them and give them all credit for what they've done. And I share it with you freely because I think that's what they intended as well. For me, grit is probably the most important aspect of life. Even more important than many measures, typical measures of success. Now, you can look on York's website and you can find my CV there, but I'll just give you a quick rundown of, kind of the obvious successes. I graduated from college in 1984 from Southern Methodist University with history and a political science degree. I went to Harvard Law School and graduated with a law degree in 1987. Practiced law for a few years, went back to school. And I got a PhD in history from Temple University in 2001. All right? So a lot of people look at that and say, oh, that's a great success. And I think that really doesn't define me, because that's kind of the end of a lot of journals. It's the stuff in between that is really significant. And it's that stuff in between that I'm going to spend some time talking about today. So my goal today is to do exactly what the students asked me to do, give you a last lecture. My goal also is to make you grittier. That when you leave here, you will understand these lessons and you can actualize them yourself. And I'm so confident, so convinced about grit, that everything I've seen is more important than money, it's more important than intelligence, it's more important than luck or good looks. I have 3 of the 4. I work at CUNY, so I don't have money. But I'm so convinced that I promise you, when you leave here, if you meet the challenges that I present to you, you will have 7.5 more minutes of life. I promise you. All right? That's my second mission. All right? So, let's begin. This is the calculus of it. Now, I flunked calculus, so I borrowed this. And we'll get into the equations later, but pay attention to the red number on the bottom, 7.6824537 minutes. Again, if you respond to the challenges, and I believe that you can, that's what you'll have with you when this talk is done. So let's begin. Persistence. Now, I was born in 1962 in Birmingham, Alabama. When I was born, the South was changing, but at that particular time, my parents and many people in their generation weren't sure what shape that change would take. I was kind of in that liminal space where it could be anything And so it was very important for me to pay attention to the lessons within my family. So my first teacher, no matter where I went, no matter where I traveled, no matter what schools I attended, my first best teachers were my family. And one of the best teachers was an aunt, my mother's favorite aunt, Aunt Z. That was her name, Z. Alexander Barron. Aunt Z lived and grew up in a small town called Mound Bayou, Mississippi. It's an all-black town created by black people in Mississippi specifically to protect them from the racial fires of the time, Jim Crow. And Aunt Z was an exceptional student. Excelled in high school there, went to a historically black college, decided that she wanted to get a master's in education, but none of the HBCUs in Mississippi offered one. So she made it known to people in charge, I don't know who that would be, so the story goes, that she wanted to attend the graduate program in education in Mississippi at the University of Mississippi, an all-white school that did not accept black people, no matter how smart, no matter how talented you were. However, Mississippi, like several states that practice this type of racial segregation, had a deal. So it was communicated back to her from state officials. Well, as long as you don't apply to the University of Mississippi for your graduate program, we will pay you to go to school anywhere else. She applied and got accepted at Columbia's Teachers College and got an Ivy League education for free, paid for by the state of Mississippi. Right? This is insane. This is absolutely insane. So hearing these stories, I realized why this was my mother's favorite aunt. Because my mother kind of copied and modeled this notion of persistence from Z. She picked it up and carried it along. My mother was born in Nashville, raised in Nashville, and was a musical prodigy. Trained as a flute player, classical flute player. And every year in Nashville, there was a high school competition for the best musicians, and I think, again, if I remember the story correctly, the way it went, the students would come to this particular hall, and they'd have a piece of music they were going to play, and they'd stand behind a curtain, play their instrument. The judges could not see them because they wanted this to be objective. They didn't want the judges, rating the students based on if they knew somebody, or if this was a family member, or whatever. They just wanted to hear the music. So I think this is 1951, 1952. My mother went, and she won the competition. Now, typically, the winner of the competition is feted in downtown Nashville at a hotel, and there's a huge lunch, and you get to play with the Nashville Symphony Orchestra. Because of racial segregation, they were not going to do that. So they took her to a park, gave her a prize and award, fed her, a box lunch, and that was the end of it. But she continued to play. She played. And when I was 5 years old, we moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where I spent my formative years. And even though she asked, she was denied permission to play with the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra because she was black. But about 30 miles north and west of us, a small town called Oak Ridge. Oak Ridge has national laboratories there. It was part of the Manhattan Project developing the nuclear bomb. We continued this type of research. So Oak Ridge, the small town in East Tennessee, attracted scientists, physicists, chemists, engineers from all over the country, all over the world, and it was this little liberal oasis in the mountains. And they had an orchestra. And they heard about my mom. They're like, "You want to play with us?" And she's like, "Sure, I'll play with you guys." And so routinely she would drive the 30 miles out to Oak Ridge and play in that symphony orchestra. And we as kids would go with her, having no idea why we were driving. There's a perfectly good orchestra right here. Why do we have to drive 30 miles to go to this orchestra? Only later realizing why we did. But closer to home, the thing that really resonated with me as a child was that my mother's persistence around our education. I started first grade in 1968, and the Knoxville City Schools had just kind of begun racial integration. I was not the first black child to attend my school, but I was among the first. And again, for my parents and many of their peers, this was, a very anxious, anxiety-producing, perhaps even dangerous situation. And so my mother was committed to stay involved in my education, in my brother's education, as we all went through this particular school. And to stay involved, she got involved in the PTA. It was not easy at first. It was the only black parent that was involved in PTA, but she stuck with it. She recruited other black parents as the demographics of the neighborhood and the school began to change, and she's recruiting 4 white parents, and then later on, Latino parents and getting everybody in, and she became this force in the county, education. Became the president of the county PTA, and then the president of the state PTA. And then eventually, through her persistence, in 1997, she was elected president of the national PTA, the first African American that ever served in that particular position. So I don't have to look far for a model of what persistence can be. Now, not everybody has an option. It's okay. She's special. But everybody can find a role model like this. Every religion provides role models. Whether it's deities or whether it's in scripture, you can find it anywhere. Every culture provides role models of persistence. Every one. No one has a monopoly on it. No one is like that. All of us can access it. You can find them anywhere, whether it's sports. Someone that I admire, the Williams sisters, Serena and Venus Williams, for instance, are great examples of persistence. Whether you like tennis or not, you should watch them. Another person that I remember maybe 5 years ago that came across my radar is Anthony Robles, NCAA champion wrestler. No legs. He was born with one leg, lost his second leg, and despite that, never wore a prosthetic and still whooped everybody that he competed against. All right? So you can find these role models everywhere. When you find them, you should latch onto them and model what it is that they do in terms of persistence. Resilience. Now, as I kind of went through really quickly the highlights from my CV, again, a lot of people will look at that and they'll say, oh wow, you're really successful, you're really bright, and I'll just say thank you very much. But for me, I know not only my successes, but my many failures. And when I think of the things that I've done in my life, if my successes are bricks, then the failures are the mortars that stack the bricks and hold them together. The failures are the things that allow me to have success. And so it's important to understand that, despite what, certain rappers might say, all I do is win. No. Nobody does that all the time. Nobody does that all the time. So it's important to be honest with yourself and confront those failures. And I'll give you some quick examples. For example, my freshman year in college, I decided, because I wanted to be grown, I was going to leave the shadow of my family and go to school, Texas, almost 1,000 miles away, Dallas, Texas. All right? And I was motivated in part again because, I wanted to be a grown man and I wanted to escape the shadow of my parents. And I said, I'm going to major in engineering because I knew there was a need for black engineers and black students were getting internships and jobs in engineering, even though I was not very good in science. And I was terrible in math. But I was convinced I'm going to be an engineer. That's what I'm going to do. And of course, nobody here has ever seen Knoxville. Most people that if I mention Knoxville, if you know it's because you drove through it, not because you stayed. All right? So Knoxville is such a small place that when I got to Dallas, Dallas was a big city. Now, you guys are New Yorkers, you're familiar with that. For me, no, it was insane. I lost my mind. I went to that school and I partied and I went all over the place and I'm meeting all kinds of people and having a great time doing everything but studying. So after my first semester of my freshman year, I had a 1.7 GPA. I had failed calculus. I wasn't kidding in this slide. I'm not joking. I failed calculus. I got a D in chemistry. My parents were outraged. And back at that time, there was no electronic grading. The envelope came in the mail. And I'd be racing to the mailbox trying to get that envelope before they did. I didn't know how bad it was, but I knew it was going to be bad. But I opened the envelope, saw one place, I'm like, oh my God. So as you can imagine, there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth, and threats were exchanged, and promises were made. But what I had to do was be honest with myself that was not what I was there to do. I wasn't there to party, and I certainly wasn't there to be an engineer. Much like Jerome, years later, I realized that was informing me. My brain wasn't wired that way. I wasn't going to be an engineer. But I knew I liked history. And so I changed my major and picked up the second major. Because I lost my scholarship, I had to work. So there were semesters where I'd take 18 hours, 21 hours to make up for the lost time. But my junior year, I was driving a cab and doing this. And it was, I made it. By the time I graduated, I scored high enough on the LSAT, and my GPA was high enough that I got into Harvard. So the most important thing was not getting into Harvard. The most important thing was understanding what I had done wrong and then bouncing back from it. In the same way, once I practiced law, I learned a valuable lesson. The practice of law is different from the study of law. The study of law can be very exciting, but the practice of law is tremendously boring. It's not very creative. I hated it. It hated me. Right? We didn't get along. Because of that, because of the misery that I was feeling and the misery I was creating in the house, my wife was like, why don't you just stop? Do something you love. Go back to school. And I was like, yeah, that's right, I should go back to school. I always loved this. And so I did. So I went back to school and worked on getting my PhD. Now, as I worked on getting my PhD, my wife, who also didn't really like practicing law as much as, as much as I did, but she didn't like it, but she could bear up under it, for a little bit. She decided, well, she'd like to be an academic as well. She was going to be a legal academic. So she was getting her master's, her LLM at Temple while I was working on my PhD. And by 1995, she had finished her program, and she was ready to go on the job market. By that time, I was what we call ADD. It was all but dissertation. I completed all my coursework. I defended my oral exams, my written exams. I was straight. So I could go wherever she wanted to go. She got several offers, and one of them was at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville Law School. So I'm like, great, I'm going home. This is fantastic. So she accepted the offer. I accepted a position as an adjunct, teaching first in Africana Studies and later in the history department. And we thought, oh man, this is great. Our life is set. At least that's what I thought. All right. She's from Jamaica, Queens. My wife graduated from Jamaica High School, class of 1980. Her parents are immigrants from the nation of Jamaica. She doesn't know anything about the South. All right. So it was a tough road for her to hoe, but she did it. And we did it together happily, raising our kids, doing the best that we could. And eventually, because the University of Tennessee had a history of racial segregation, very overt racial segregation, like much of the South, the university was compelled by court order to try and diversify its students, its staff, and its faculty. So word got around that maybe there was some kind of way that they could be on the tenure track in the history department if I completed my PhD, my dissertation, by a particular time, and I said that I would. And I did. And I got the job. All right? And I did everything in that job that I do here, even though that school is the complete inversion of York. It is 90% white. Most of the students are conservative. Many of them consider themselves to be Christian fundamentalists. And of those white students, 60% of them come from a 9-county area in East Tennessee. All right? But I didn't change the thing that I did. I did exactly what I wanted to do. All right? My classes were always full. Always had great student evaluation. So in terms of my relationship with students, it was fantastic. I mentored lots of black students, whether they were history majors or not. I mentored the progressive students. I mentored the LGBT students. I mentored the 3 Chicano students and the 2 Native American students that we had on campus. I mentored all the international students who came from Germany, and Austria, and China, and Senegal, and Ghana, who could not believe they were living in America. I mentored all of them. I talked to all of them. And so I met with students in a way that even my colleagues did not. I did service on the campus, served on search committees, I served on master's thesis committees or dissertation committees. I did everything that I was supposed to do. And in terms of scholarship, I produced articles, I went to major conferences, I created a name for myself in the field of American Foreign Relations, and there's a group called SHAFER, the Society of Historians of American Foreign Relations. I would always go and present there. And I'm not trying to say that everybody agreed with what I said or liked what I said, but there was a clear appreciation that I was doing the work. And I felt confident that there was no doubt I was going to get tenure at UT and that I would spend the rest of my life teaching in my hometown. And not so I had this mission. I was going to do it. I was going to be there. I was going to do it. Until I wasn't. Until the university decided, first at the dean level of arts and sciences and then higher up, that I was not qualified for tenure. My scholarship was not scholarly enough, even though everything that I had done for the 5 or 6 years before the determination on paper, everything was fine. Everyone told me how great it was. And I could go to these professional conferences. And I went to conferences that my colleagues would go to. They were like, how did you get a paper on the American Historical Association panel? That's hard. I said, yeah, it's hard. I've been rejected 3 or 4 times, but I kept doing it, and I'm doing it. How'd you get to OAH? And I got rejected, but I kept doing it. All right? They were stunned, but when the time came to give me tenure, they denied me. All right? And so this was a bit of a shock, because this is the cover of the first book that I wrote. And this was really the linchpin of my tenure application. This book, Holding the Line, Race, Racism, and American Foreign Policies for Africa, 1960 to 1961. And what it is ground, if I can be so bold as to say kind of groundbreaking, because it examines white privilege in the influence of foreign policy in a specific time, in a specific place, and situates it within the context of America. So it's an examination of the Eisenhower administration, starting with what they did here domestically, and then how that influenced what was happening overseas. And again, I don't want to say that everybody agreed with the book or liked the book, but my colleagues within the field seem to really appreciate it. And I've continued to make a name for myself in Schaefer. And so it was really odd being in the profession. It's a really tremendously odd sensation of going to conferences and people say, "Oh, you're George White. Yeah, I saw that book. That's really interesting. That's really fascinating. Maybe we can talk about it. I don't agree with everything, but that's really it's really an interesting way to look at things." Some people that really liked it and thought it was, groundbreaking. But either way, everyone agreed that it made a contribution to scholarly literature. Everyone except my own university. So, for reasons that I won't get into now because of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have, because I'm not embarrassed about this, at least not anymore. I can get into details of why I think it happened. But nevertheless, it happened. And so I had to resolve myself. Something was going to have to change. What was I going to do? And at first I decided I was going to fight it. So I appealed internally within the university because I wanted to keep that job. I wanted to stay the same in my hometown. I love being with my parents. I love being with my younger brother and his family. I love seeing my friends from high school or even before high school, childhood in the neighborhood. It was great. But it soon became clear that nothing I did, even filing a lawsuit, was going to leverage the university. They were determined to get rid of it. So I had to resign myself to the fact that I was going to have to look for another job. But not just look for another job, I had to look for a job as a loser because I had lost. I had lost my bid for tenure. And this marks an academic. It's easy to go into a job search, and many of you know it. You go into a job search where your credentials are pristine, and you present yourself to the search committee or to some interviewer and say, "Oh, this is what I've done." But if there's a question, a doubt, something negative that you have to explain, you understand that the chances of you being successful are greatly reduced. And that's what I faced. In addition, because I had this other career before, many of the people that I was competing against were not only physically younger than I was, but professionally younger than I was. So they had research agendas, but they hadn't kind of shaped them yet. And so many schools felt like, okay, you can take someone fresh out of school and you kind of mold them into the academic you want to be. Me, I was me. And it was clear I wasn't going to change being me. I was a mule. This is what you get. This is what you get. And so it was difficult. I did lots of interviewing, and very few bites came. I was at a conference interviewing, and I come back to my hotel room, and I call my wife. She's like, "How'd it go?" I said, "I think it went pretty well, but there are 50 people lined up waiting, to come in after me. So, I don't really know what's going to happen." By this time, she had gotten her job at Toro College of Law in Central Islip, so we knew we were going to New York. We really wanted to stay together, but at that point, I hadn't seen anything in New York, and I was like, well, maybe I can get close. Maybe Jersey, maybe Connecticut, or maybe Pennsylvania. She said, well, there's the city university. Maybe we can look on the website and find something. And sure enough, she did. And she said, "George, there's a posting here. Some guy, Robert Parmet, just posted a job looking for a historian at York College in Queens." I was like, "Really?" "Yeah." So I looked on the laptop. I saw it. I said, "Man, this is fantastic. All right, as soon as I get home, I'm going to send my CD. I'm going to send your writing staff and all this stuff. I'm going to send it to York. See what happens. Just see what happens." All right? So I sent the stuff, and Bob called me within a day. Receiving. He's like, "Oh, you'd be great. We'd love to have you. Can you get up here? We can't pay to have you fly here, but can you get up here?" I'm like, "Sure." I drive 750 miles. I'll be right there. I'll be right there. Dude, just hold on. All right, I'm coming. 7 days to say. All right. So I came and I interviewed, and I was amazed. Not by the salary, not by the building.
No.
I was amazed by you. The students that I met, the colleagues that I met, the people that I met, I was like, this could be fantastic. And the odd thing was that once York showed interest in me, suddenly all these other schools began to show interest in me. And by April of 2007, I had a couple of offers to consider. But I was like, yeah, I think this is the place. I think this is where I need to be. And so this was my second chance, in many ways, from failure. Even though I didn't do anything wrong, I had lost. But this was my second chance, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to Bob and Howard and Laura and Martin and Basteo, who took a chance on me, the provost at the time who took a chance on me, President Keyes, who took a chance on me. Because they were getting a whole mule, they just didn't know what kind of mule they were getting. All right? So, part of what became necessary upon moving to New York was to somehow find a way to make a life for myself here. Again, I'm a small town southern boy. I'm not used to the big city. As excited as I was to have a job and to be in a place where, it would be great to meet that family, because my wife's family lives here, and I have my older brother, my middle brother lives in Westchester County, not far away. It was going to be exciting, but still, there was the trauma that I had to deal with. Again, the guilt. What did I do wrong? Even intellectually, though I knew I didn't do anything wrong, it still nagged at me. There was the trauma of departure, of taking my children away from their friends. Our oldest daughter was going to be a high school senior. And we had to tell her, you're going to leave, and you're not going to graduate with the friends that you've made over the last 3 years. You're going to go to a completely different school. Our two youngest kids had essentially grown up their entire lives with their grandparents, with their uncle, his family. Take all of that away, all of their friends, and lose that. So, despite the excitement of moving to New York City, to the big town, there was this trauma, this pain I felt for them because of how hard this was going to be on them. And again, despite the fact that I knew I had done nothing wrong, I still felt responsible. It was my fault that there was not going to be a senior prom with friends. It was my fault that you were not going to see your best friend anymore. It was my fault that, our youngest daughter wasn't going to play with her cousin, who was simply born, a couple of months before. They were like twins. They were inseparable. It was my fault they were going to be together. Then there was the shock of arrival. Part of it was the acclimation to New York City. My wife, it was easy. It was like riding a bike again. She was home. For me, it was a little bit different. Again, it's hard to go from that environment and switch gears to something so radically different. I mean, it wasn't like we were moving from Knoxville to Nashville or Knoxville to Atlanta. We were moving to New York. Right? And for me, it was both exciting and exhilarating and absolutely terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Physically terrifying, because I'm not comfortable walking on the streets the way you guys are. And you get to the intersection and there's 1,000 people in front of you, and there's 1,000 people behind you, and the light changes and everybody is crossing that street. I'm not used to that. There was the shock of trying to acclimate to a new living environment. Where we lived in Knoxville, we had a modest house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch, but it was beautiful. I loved that house. It was my dream house. We lived on rolling hills, and our backyard sloped down. We lived on an acre of land. And we had a big picture window. When we looked to the south and east out the window, we couldn't see our neighbors below us. All we saw were treetops and the mountains in the distance. It was everything I had dreamed of. And now I was living in an apartment in Westbury, neighbors on top of Brush Hollow Road, trucks driving up and down. It's like, oh, this is insane. How do I deal with this? And so gradually, the thought kind of occurred to me, I don't think it was something intentional. I think it was just kind of accidental. Maybe I could make a game out of this. Right? So when I'm in the city, when I'm in Manhattan, if I'm up on Jamaica Avenue, and the sidewalk's really crowded, I'll just pretend like I'm skiing between people. Or maybe I'll smile at people and say hi and see how many folks I'll piss off. I'll just, they'll do something like that. Just make a game out of it. Or even when I wake up in the morning and I brush my teeth with my right hand, maybe half the time I'll spend brushing my teeth left hand. Just try that. And just keep doing that. Just do these little things. They got involved in the games and the lives of our kids. My wife and I were always involved parents, but it certainly increased when we were here. Our oldest daughter played rugby on the women's rugby team at Georgetown, where she went to college for a year and played soccer. She was a field hockey athlete, so we were used to going around to games. Our son picked up track and field and became an outstanding athlete in track and field, and our youngest is doing the same. And so part of it was not just being there, but kind of figuring out what to do. So I don't know anything about discus, throwing a discus, or throwing a shot put, or throwing a hammer. So we'd sit down and we'd watch a video together and say, oh, watch how they do their feet like this, or how the arm goes like this, or whatever it was, and got involved in that. And then, of course, I started working out in the gym, trying to lose some weight that I had mysteriously gained. I don't know how. From probably stress eating and everything else. And so all these little things, without me really knowing, kind of led me to post-traumatic growth. I began to grow. So I was experiencing it. It was a surprise because, like most of you, I'm familiar with post-traumatic stress. But I wasn't familiar with post-traumatic growth. I didn't realize that you could grow. And scientists and scholars, among them, of our colleagues, one of your professors, Selena Rogers, teaches about this in social work. They tell us that trauma does not mean that you're just destined to suffer forever. That in fact, trauma provides a platform or springboard to achieve the life that you wanted. And so, one of the interesting things that I began to learn was that not only was it possible to grow, but you may be asking yourself, can I grow without the trauma? Do I have to go with what you went through, Dr. White? You're asking yourself, no, you can grow without the trauma. Yes. Of course you can. You don't have to go through what I did. And there appear to be 4 types of strengths that stimulate post-traumatic growth. But instead of me giving some long exposition about these 4 strengths, I'd rather just show you. So let's get into the second mission. Let's play some games. All right. Now, there are going to be 4 games, 4 challenges that we take on. When you win, you get a point. Everybody that gets 4 points wins the whole thing. You get the gift that I promised you at the very beginning. You ready? Let's go. The first challenge. Stand up and take 3 steps, or ball your hands into a fist